be screwed. Feel my own adrenaline, yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 37th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfiction.net. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. The Searles had just finished breakfast with the royal sisters. They also had watched them switch the moon in the sky for the sun again, and it still left them thunderstruck. There was no slow gradual dawn here. It went from the dark of night to early morning in a few moments. How the ponies had even developed the concept of twilight, the soft glowing light from the sky when the sun is just below the horizon but full night is not in place, they could not figure out. The physics of the situation left Castor gobsmacked. He knew a bit about astronomy, enough to know that flat worlds were impossible. Anything natural over a certain size, 100 kilometers or so, would collapse to a globe shape. Gravity did not allow any other choices. Unless it had been built. The science to do that might as well be called magic. Then moving the sun and moon to create night and day. It made his head hurt just to contemplate it. There were two ponies waiting in the corridor for the Searles when they returned to their rooms. It was Prince Blueblood, and Castor had to think a moment. Then he realized it was a pony named Fancy Pants, whom he had met the night before. He was as pristinely dressed now as he had been then, if a bit less formal. "Good morning, gentle ponies," the fancily outfitted stallion said as they approached. "I'm Fancy Pants. You might remember me from last night." He smiled, his thin mustache quivering slightly. "I was hoping I might be able to meet with you this morning, if you aren't already engaged." Unsure of what was going on, Castor said, "Of course," and nodded back at the monocle-wearing white unicorn. "We hadn't anything planned except to perhaps take a bit of a walk around Canterlot. It looks absolutely appealing." His wife and daughter nodded. Fancy Pants exchanged a look with Blueblood. "Why, I would be delighted to show you around our appealing capital, if you don't mind." He actually looked like he would be happy to accompany them. The Searles exchanged looks. Melada just shrugged ever so slightly. Castor looked back at Fancy and said, "I don't see why not. It would save us having to ask the concierge about a guide. Just give us a moment or two to grab our saddlebags. And freshen up," added his wife. "I want my camera," said Talia. The Searles entered the main part of their suite. Fancy Pants, still in the corridor, turned to Blueblood and said, "Thank you for escorting me, Prince Blueblood. I am in your debt." The blonde-maned unicorn nodded. "Nonsense. You would have done the same for me. And I am ambassador to the United Kingdom, so it could be considered one of my duties," he said, with a slight sniff at the end. Fancy Pants tut-tutted, "Don't be like that, Prince Blueblood. We are friends, after all." Yes," Blueblood said with a slight smile. "Well, I will see you later, Fancy." He turned and trotted off. Fancy Pants shook his head slightly. "That stallion," he muttered. He turned to look at Castor inside the suite. "I will wait out here until you are ready." His magic grabbed the door and pulled it closed. It was almost 15 minutes later when they rejoined the blue-maned unicorn. The Searles all had their saddlebags. His daughter, on a whim, had decided to wear her necklace from last night. His wife had decided to continue the match with the bracelet. He refused to let them put the hairband on his tail. Fancy Pants was as good as his word, giving them a delightful guided tour of the interesting and magnificent parts of the city. While he might not have been a practiced guide, he certainly knew the history of his city. Not to mention where to find the most picturesque parts, for which Talia was quite pleased and thankful. Castor was glad he had brought so much film. The pictures his daughter was taking would be treated as gold, he knew, by the intelligence agents at home. He would spend hours being grilled on each of them. They were having lunch at a restaurant that Castor knew was far out of his price range as a warrant officer in Her Majesty's service. It wasn't that he was an expert at translating pounds to bits, but the decor of the place just screamed money. That and the fact that the menus didn't display prices at all. He watched as Fancy Pants delicately suggested plates that he thought they might like. Ones that didn't require a lot of dexterity to consume. It was quite thoughtful of him. It also showed that he had done more than cursory research before approaching them. Castor would need to watch what he divulged. For someone Castor had expected to be a stuck-up gob, the pony was actually quite warm and personable. Ponyable. After the waitress took the order, Castor turned to the unicorn and said, "So, what was it you wanted to discuss with us?" He raised his eyebrows. Fancy Pants smiled. "Ah, yes," he said, sitting back. The pony studied him for a moment. "You aren't a diplomat, are you?" Castor snorted as his wife smirked. "Not hardly. I earn my pay." Fancy Pants smirked back. "I'm sure you do." He paused. "You strike me as someone who is or was in the guard." Castor smiled back. Fancy Pants wasn't a poof in a suit pretending he did useful things. He was an astute observer, and had the brains to know what he was seeing. Which reinforced the point that Castor needed to be careful what he said. Castor leaned back, too. 20 years on both ends of the pointy stick. Yes. I can believe that. His eyes flicked over him. Even being a stranger to wings and 4 legs, you carry yourself well. They stared at each other. His wife and daughter watched. His daughter very interested because she had never seen her father like this, and his wife because she had rarely seen it, as well. To the point then, Fancy Pants said leaning forward. "Your daughter's necklace. Is that what it looks like? Aluminium? Might I inspect it?" Startled at where this was going. Aluminium? Castor looked at his daughter. She looked back, just as surprised, but then took off the necklace, which was really weird to watch when she didn't have fingers and used her primary wing feathers instead. She draped the necklace across her hoof and held it out to him. His magic lifted it up and brought it close to him. He studied the wirework carefully through his monocle. Such intricate work. So light. "Yes, it is aluminium," Castor said, confirming the stallion's guess. His wife put her hoof on the table, the bracelet very visible above her hoof. "As is this," she said. Fancy Pants leaned across the table, then said, "May I?" At her nod, he unclasped the bracelet and studied it up close. He sighed, and looked at Castor. "And such things," he waved at the bracelet and necklace, "are common." Castor nodded, still not sure what was going on. Fancy Pants looked at him very seriously. "Pure aluminium is very rare in Equestria. And expensive." Castor felt his eyebrows go up. He saw his daughter's and wife's eyebrows go up. "I take it you aren't wealthy?" Castor shook his head mutely. The unicorn sighed. "These 2 pieces are worth double your per annum." The Searles stared at him in shock. "How much are they in your world?" He and his wife looked at their daughter. She stared back, then said, shakily, 10 pounds. She looked at the pony. "That includes the hairband." He tilted his head at her. "Mane or tail piece, I guess you would say," Castor put in. "And make that 10 bits instead of pounds. Maybe 20 if my per annum is lower than the normal yearly wage for a worker here in Equestria." Fancy slowly nodded. "If I wanted to import, say, your weight in aluminium, what would it cost me?" Castor shrugged. "As ingots? I weigh about 91 kilos, so maybe 300 or 400 pounds. He sighed. Given that your bits are solid gold, from what I've seen, and the current price of gold in my world. About 3 or 4 bits. Fancy Pants swayed where he sat, and for a moment Castor worried he would faint. After a moment of blinking his eyes and staring out the window, he turned back to Castor's daughter. So if I offered you a bit for these 2 pieces of jewelry? 3, she said automatically, they're a set with the hairband. He stared at her a moment. 3 pieces of jewelry, you would consider that a steal as it would be 220 of your pounds? She nodded, stunned at the amount. He looked at Castor. I wanted to verify my suspicions, and ask you, if it was feasible, to arrange to sell me some aluminium directly. But this. He leaned back. An unscrupulous individual could make millions off the price discrepancy between our worlds. It was at that moment the waitress returned with their food. Not a word was spoken until she left. He stared at Castor. How do we do this without either of us looking like we're cheating each other, or our governments? He turned and stared out the window. Then started to absent-mindedly eat. They slowly started on their own lunches, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, after the waitress asked them if they wanted a dessert they didn't fancy, Pants said to Castor, if I offer you 27 bits per kilo? He tilted his head slightly in query. Castor nodded. Which would give us both the same profit margin, the pony continued, at the current prices for the metals 998%. If your numbers are accurate. 27 gold coins drifted out of a pocket in his coat and formed 3 stacks in front of Talia. He looked at Castor. We shall call this a proof of concept. A trial at metal trading across the portal. Castor nodded as his daughter and wife stared at him, wide-eyed. As aluminium becomes more available, the price will drop precipitously, so every exchange we do will have to be recalculated. But I think the price will go up before it comes down, Fancy Pants continued. Castor nodded again. I think we need to get the governments involved in this. There may be other repercussions of which we know nothing. Fancy Pants nodded. Yes. In the meantime, Castor said, why don't you consider the 2 pieces here and the 1 back in the room as presents, and a down payment on the kilo of aluminium you just purchased? He looked at his daughter, who was still staring at the 27 gold coins as if mesmerized. You don't mind, do you, honey? She shook her head wordlessly. There were only a few more places Fancy Pants felt they should see. With business successfully concluded, to both their profits, he thought, it was as an even more cheerful guide. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that they returned to the suite at the castle. Talia quickly delivered the 3rd piece of the set to their new owner. Even if the rest of the deal fell through, neither party would feel cheated. The last Wisengamot of the year was normally a deadly dull event. Usually, one after another of the aged members stood up. Each old fart talked about all the great things he had accomplished in the Wisengamot that year. How Wizardkind simply would not have had such successful a year without his inestimable and vital assistance. And so on, and so forth. If it weren't for the time limit of 10 minutes, the unstoppable train of member after member would have lasted well into the next day. If you included timeouts for dining and sleeping, it would easily have consumed the rest of the year, as well. As it was, it would take nearly all day. This Monday, however, Dumbledore threw the train entirely off the tracks with the announcement of Sirius' trial, and the reasons for it. There was some resistance, but as the trial was so sudden, those who were opposed to his release did not have the time to organize an effective campaign to declare him guilty, outright. Given the probable consequences described by the chief warlock if they tried to delay, the others were not of a mind to try to postpone the trial until next year. After all, they were convinced that Sirius Black was guilty of murder many times over. To let him go was unconscionable. Plus, for almost all of the Wisengamot members, the specter of a hostile ministry imprisoning themselves or their heirs without a trial, or any legal recourse because of this precedent, was a weapon they did not want to hand to their enemies. Meaning, the trial had to be held immediately. As head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Amelia Bones had had the remainder of Saturday and all of Sunday to marshal the evidence against Sirius Black. To say it was not much was a drastic understatement. Looking only at the evidence gathered at the scene, and discounting popularly known facts, it was clear that they had arrested Black simply because he was the only wizard in sight when they arrived. She, naturally, picked the best defense solicitor she knew and asked him to represent Sirius. The sheer lack of evidence was a fatal flaw for the prosecution. The prosecution could only show that the wizard was at the scene, laughing, and seemed to be confessing to killing the muggles. The weight of the defense's arguments is wand having only miscellaneous spells, no wizard witnesses, the victim leaving behind only a finger raised the bar even higher. Having him swear on his life and magic that he was not a Death Eater and that he had never supported the wizard known as Voldemort had been particularly convincing. There could only be one decision from the court, despite Sirius Black's opponents. The vote for his innocence in the trial was, for once, clearly based entirely on evidence and for the common good of all wizards. The more cynical observers noted that it was probably more of the old families trying to protect their own interests than any real belief in the accused innocence or guilt. In any case, the vote was nearly unanimous. The only guilty votes were from members that everyone knew hated the wizard, or his family, and who didn't care what the evidence said. A substantial number of galleons were given to the wizard as compensation for his sufferings while in Azkaban, with the additional promise that all medical expenses would be covered by the ministry for as long as necessary. After the trial, no one was interested in making speeches to the other members. They only wanted to spin the story to the press that they had known all along of the wizard's innocence, but that no one would listen to them. Or decrying how corrupt the ministry was in allowing an innocent wizard from such an old and noble family to be sent to Azkaban. Sirius, himself, was not heard from afterwards, as he was hustled directly from the courtroom to a private room at St. Mungo's. Albus and Twilight joined him a bit later, to assess for themselves his mental and physical state and to bring him up to date on Harry Potter's situation. And, for once, the Daily Prophet printed the entire transcript of the trial, with wordy descriptions and pictures of his pensive memories of what had happened. The whole country, indeed, much of the world, was appalled at the injustice that had been dealt the poor wizard. Naturally, there were those on both sides of the political spectrum who were unhappy with Sirius Black's release, Albus knew. He could only hope his more stubborn allies would gradually understand that the wizard was not his parents. That Sirius wouldn't necessarily follow the path his family had staked out over the centuries. On Monday, Bright Star told Top Marks that a favorite aunt on her late father's side had taken ill and was in a Manhattan hospital. She wanted to take several weeks off. Naturally, he gave her the leave of absence. "Are you sure you don't want to go immediately?" he said. "No. She's quite old. We think it's her time to go. The doctors say it will be several weeks, so I have time to set things here in order. No reason to leave you in the lurch." She had smiled sadly. He took it hook, line, and sinker. Late that afternoon, she went through the portal. The guards were used to her carrying what seemed to be almost everything she owned when she traveled. They didn't notice that this time she had a fifth of her gems and bits with her, as well. She went to Diagon Alley via the embassy floor. Instead of heading directly to Ollivander's, she had told Top Marks she wanted to discuss something with the old wand maker. She ducked into an alley between two shops and changed her hair color while darkening her skin to a nice tan. She took out 2 bits and concentrated, wand in hand, slowly changing the bits into galleons, and siphoning off the excess gold into a ring. Then she headed a bit farther into the alley, and rented a room for a month. As soon as the landlord left, she emptied her saddlebags of the bits, gems, and some of her books. A notice-me-not kept them out of mind. Then she went back into the alley, pausing to revert her appearance. A few minutes later, she was inviting the old wand maker to dinner to discuss wands. It was a delightful dinner, if more than a bit different from what she was used to eating. But she needed to adapt, and she took careful note of how Ollivander ordered and what. He answered many of her questions about dining before they segued into wand lore. Several hours after the shift change, she returned to the portal. The new guards never noticed her saddlebags were quite a bit lighter than they had been, and contained only a few books. It helped that most of her trips were during the day shift and these guards were unused to her habits, although they knew of her. On Tuesday afternoon she again visited Diagon Alley. This time she visited the Truckles' trunks. Over dinner and after several hours discussing expansion charms and their little quirks, she suggested Truckle contact the Equestrian embassy about having one of his nephews set up a shop in Ponyville, and another nephew set up in Canterlot. She also dropped off another fifth of her future wealth. Harry stared at his mum from his chair at the table in the kitchen. For once, he was alone. It was several days after the ball. Ginny and Myrtle were off somewhere talking about, as Myrtle had gigglingly put it, girly stuff. Apple Bloom was helping her sister, just as Sweetie Belle was helping her sister. Scootaloo was off helping Rainbow Dash perfect her latest maneuver. Percy was in his room, making notes, he said. Ron had decided to visit Fluttershy because he missed his pet rat, Scabbers, back at the castle. The variety of animals congregating at her place was astonishing. No one knew where the twins were. Or what they were doing. It made Harry a bit nervous when he thought about that, so he tried not to think about it. It was a lot like trying not to think about an elephant. Harry was polishing off an afternoon snack. He was just glad the four hadn't been grounded for trying to get their brewer's cutie marks. It wasn't even their fault, really. They had been helping Berry Punch prepare her latest batch of beer for the tavern. Nobody had ever told them you could overbrew beer enough for it to catch fire. The sap sealing the barrel's staves hadn't helped. Berry had taken most of the blame, saying that she had miscalculated the time the beer had been fermenting. The adults had mostly managed to disguise their dismay at that admission, which lessened the CMC's planned punishment. Harry had been looking at Applejack at the time, and she was always just a bit slower at hiding her true feelings where the cutie mark crusaders were concerned. The adults must have been hoping to give a punishment that would prevent any crusading until the students returned to Hogwarts. The fermentation had been a bit longer than Berry had thought by a month. Or maybe 2. She couldn't decide if the date on the side of the barrel they had decanted was 10, 11, or 12. She had been a bit less than sober when she had written it. Fortunately, they had managed to save the barrels they had set aside earlier that day to start fermenting. And Sweetie Belle, cold sober, had written the date on them. Well, at least the fire had happened before Berry Punch could salt the beer, so they hadn't wasted any ingredients and only one of the storage sheds had been a complete loss. They did get a stomping ovation from the Weasley twins. Ginny, Percy, and Myrtle had merely been stunned silent at the sight of the conflagration. Fortunately, Reparo had managed to recover everything from the damage except the beer and the one storage shed. The speed with which Mum had put down their next cutie mark crusade suggestion, to set up a foundry, had been truly impressive and loud, and seconded by the other adults even louder. That had led to Mum declaring Wednesday as a day to relax instead of crusade. Several ponies had asked just when it was that the students would be returning to their school. Hearing that it was less than 5 days away had made them inordinately happy. He knew there were at least 2 intending to celebrate the event. But, at the moment, Harry was staring at his mum, who had a most curious expression. She hadn't been in the kitchen a second ago. In fact, he had thought she was on the other side of the castle. Then she had slid past him from behind, slowly spinning while sitting. He turned and looked behind him. Nothing but an apparently solid wall. The door to the side was still closed. He looked back at her. She had stopped spinning. She looked at him, and frowned. He raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. "I was in the map room, on my throne," she said thoughtfully. "There are 2 gems on the arm that didn't used to be there. I pushed one. The throne slid back a bit and dumped me on a slide." She blinked. "And here I am." She stood and started for the door. Harry quickly followed. 10 minutes later Harry bumped lightly against his mum, stopping the rest of his spin. They were both sitting in the kitchen, again. He looked up at her. "I wonder where the other button goes." Harry might have had a chance at keeping up if she hadn't flown up the staircase. As it was, he reached the door just in time to see her disappear into the floor, again. He had barely sat in the throne before he punched the other gem and landed with a plop in his mum's lap on the library reading couch a few seconds later. They looked around the room, contemplating. He leaned back and looked up at her. Do you think the other thrones all go to the same places? It was another race to the throne room. This time they both teleported. She still beat him. Rainbow's throne had a single button. Fortunately, Mum decided she should go first. She was hovering, ready to catch him, when he shot out of a wall into the air 3 stories up. Pinky's had 2 buttons. One went to the kitchen, and dropped them right in between the baking supplies and the oven, in front of a table. The other went to the deep end of a swimming pool. Harry didn't even know they had a swimming pool in the castle. Neither did his mum, apparently. The castle was still evolving, it seemed. Maybe. Perhaps. But why did this make him think of the sisters' castle and the twins? Applejack's led to the kitchen and the front door. Fluttershy's led to the garden. Rarity's, naturally, went to a sewing room, which was how they discovered the castle had a sewing room. Spike's ran to either his room, the kitchen, or the library. Well, his mum said, and slowly walked around the table and looked at each throne carefully. That is certainly new. She looked up at Harry, who sat on Pinky's throne. I wonder why those were added. She glanced around the room. Those buttons weren't on the thrones before today, or we would have noticed. Harry just grinned at her and punched the button. He heard her sigh as he disappeared into the tunnel on his way to the pool. That evening, after dinner, Filthy Rich arrived with a contract and a bag of bits. A big bag of bits. When he left, the twins were more than a tad gobsmacked. They were also 2,000 bits richer. 1,000 of those bits gave Rich exclusive marketing rights in Equestria to the twins' gender-changing candies. With a prepaid order for 1,000 pieces that lasted for an hour each. As the first order. With the hint that the next order could be 10,000 pieces if sales took off as he expected. The twins were having problems believing there were that many pranksters who would be interested in their candies. They were thrilled at the order, but still puzzled. Myrtle just laughed at them, and refused to explain. They were, after all, only 13 and just discovering that girls could be interesting outside of the Quidditch field. Myrtle, naturally, had almost 50 years' experience as an observer of the human condition. She laughed louder and longer each time they asked. Twilight, who was overseeing the transaction, turned bright red during the discussions after Rich left. She, too, refused to explain why the candies could be so popular. She just muttered, "You'll find out when you get older." Sweetie Belle, when she was given her percentage the following day, realized she and by extension, Apple Bloom, Scootaloo, and Harry were rich. The CMC would never have to worry about needing a job. She was forgetting about their vault in Gringotts. That was on the other side of the portal. Besides, it belonged to all 4, not just her. Even if her share would make the Apple family rich beyond their dreams. She knew exactly why the candies would be popular. She, too, refused to educate the twins on why their candies would make them rich beyond their imaginations. Which made Myrtle laugh even harder. Bright Star spent part of Wednesday afternoon talking to the proprietor of Slug and Jigger's apothecary. She picked up several potions that the wizard said would help ease the passage of a loved one into the next great adventure. She picked several others that seemed that they might be useful, such as the wit sharpening potion, essence of Dittany, and Murtlap essence. After changing her appearance, she went into Gringotts to set up a vault. Yes, the clerk said irritably, sneering at her. Without a word, she laid the 4 gems she had on the counter. He picked one up, looked at with a magnifying glass, and then gave her a long stare. "Irjit," he called. "Take these, and her, to Mstr Knife Thrower," he said as the goblin arrived, handing him a sack with the gems in it. After a puzzling trip in which she knew they crossed their trail at least twice, she was in a room with 5 goblins. One was seated, the other 4 were in the corners and armed with swords and spears. "Before we do business, show me your normal form," the seated goblin said. She hesitated, then reversed her alterations to her human form. He raised an eyebrow. "No," he snarled, "your equestrian form." She stared at him as he stared back. She sighed. If she had to, although she hadn't realized that equestrian gems were that distinctive. He studied her lilac coat, two-tone purple and teal mane and tail. He took special note of her cutie mark of a purple and white star with 2 blue glimmering streams of smoke above it. "Your true name." Her eyes narrowed. While she expected the goblins wouldn't mention her appearance or cutie mark, her name was another matter. "If you longing," the goblin said after a moment, "we can arrange your vault to be under another name. Your true name needn't be known outside this office." She nodded slowly. "Starlight Glimmer." He grunted and picked up the gems, inspecting them one by one before placing them back in the bag. 73,000 galleons for the 4. No haggling. She looked at him a moment, then said, 88,000. He glared at her. 73,000. No haggling. I have more. 88,000. And I have contacts in the Muggle world I could sell these to instead of you. He stood and slammed his hands on the desk. 73,000. No haggling. She sighed. I guess I won't be opening a vault. She leaned towards the desk, hand stretched to grab the bag. He snorted loudly and slammed his knife through the neck of the bag, pinning it to the desk. 73,000. But no fees while you live. Except on loans. And a free wallet. She paused and looked at him expectantly. And preferred treatment as a client, he reluctantly added. Then she smiled and slowly sat back down. Excellent. It's a joy to do business with you. He glared at her. Pity I can't say the same, he growled. What are common names that won't attract attention? The goblin wrote something on a paper, and dropped it into a drawer. Then he looked at her. Are you an enemy of Princess Twilight? Does it matter? She asked curiously. Where had that come from? And why? There was an undercurrent there that she had been unaware of. Not in Gringotts. Oh, definitely, there was an undercurrent. Had someone else come through before the new security was set up? Had the changeling contacted them? Or some other pony? She looked at him, considering. We are not friends. If I could do her harm without risk, I would. He stared at her with narrowed eyes. Keep your silly disputes outside of Gringotts. We will not tolerate violence inside these walls. She nodded her understanding. There was thump from the desk. Knife thrower opened a drawer and took out a paper. There is a vault in the name of Borgia. It is currently empty. If you adopt it, everyone will assume you are a lost relative from the continent. With her new name and a new appearance, and Borgia headed for Truckle's trunks, again. This time she purchased an apartment trunk, furnished. Then she took it to her rental flat and transferred everything into it. After that, she placed another set of notice-me-nots on it and slid it under the bed. That wallet was just so much more convenient than carrying around a bag of bits. Why hadn't any pony thought to do that in Equestria? It would have made banking so much easier, and don't get her started on the expansion charms and apartment trunks. Such things would have made it so much simpler, and more comfortable, when she was traveling the country. No need to sleep in the wild, her favorite foods always available, showers and rest stops at her pleasure. All the conveniences of home, but you could carry it with you. Ha! And ponies thought that snails had it good carrying their homes. Plus, absolute safety from any of the wildlife that might consider a pony a snack or meal. Celestia. She had to shake her head ruefully. The things the wizards had done in the last few hundred years dwarfed the accomplishments in Equestria in the last 1,000. The FLU network alone would completely revolutionize pony society. Never mind what wands would do to it, the entire educational system would have to be rebuilt. Flying carpets for families and small cargo. Unbelievable. Then there was how the featherlight charm was going to change how goods were shipped. The ponies seemed to have been stuck in the thought, my mother did it this way, so I will, too. All these inventions from the wizards were going to make Equestria almost impossible to recognize in a mere generation. Speaking of snails, though, muggles made both wizards and ponies look like they were barely moving with innovations. Airplanes for those that can't fly, and that flew at incredible speeds. Trains that were almost as fast. Ships that were the size of cities. All things that didn't even exist a mere 100 years ago. Not to mention communications. Telephones and televisions were going to structurally change how society functioned. Then there were their weapons. Those made her shiver in fear. She had to shake her head in resignation. Ponies were such dolts. But they were fast learners. The EUP Guard was already dramatically changing their tactics and training. The next foe to attack Equestria was in for a big surprise. A very unpleasant one, for sure. Thursday, she told Top Marks she wanted to peruse the books at Flourish and Blots to see if anything new on wands had come, and pick up a few interesting books to read while she was in Manhattan. He hoofed her a few galleons. They are research materials. The cost should come out of our budget, he had insisted. She accepted the coins. The books she purchased with those galleons, she would have some pony shipped back from Manhattan in 2 weeks. They would provide excellent proof that she really was in that city. Naturally, they would also serve as a cover story and hide that she was moving more of her belongings to the other side of the portal. Broderick looked at Albus dolefully. The pensive sat on the table between them. They had just finished reviewing his evening in Equestria. A small vial with a silvery liquid in it sat to one side. The unspeakable sighed as he pocketed the vial. This will have quite an impact on everything, he said sourly. Albus nodded. He mentally shuddered. He couldn't help but wonder how would this affect the prophecy. They both stared at the pensive. I propose we officially call them Equestrians, stated the chief warlock, as that appears their preferred name for themselves. Broderick nodded. That they are actually from Atlantis should be strictly unofficial. He nodded again. I suggest that no official notice of this god should be made. We'll merely pretend that he is a powerful wizard, perhaps more so than Merlin. But nothing more will be said. If it became known just how powerful he is, there would be mass panic once everyone realized just what that meant. And we might attract his direct attention. Albus shuddered at what Cornelius might do on meeting the creature. Besides fainting. Although, considering the general state of the ministry, there really wasn't much he could to add to the everyday chaos. Broderick was always a wizard of few words, he simply nodded. I'll show this memory, edited to remove that portion, to the minister, the chief warlock continued. And present the conclusion that the portal changed the ancient wizards into ponies. I'll suggest that families with squib relations might want to encourage them to move to Equestria to represent their family's interests in that world. Plus, while there, they would be Pegasi and could at least be a meaningful participant in a magical culture. And their children, if they had any while over there, might be full wizards or witches when they came back here. Especially if they married an Equestrian. Albus shook his head. It is a truly magic-rich environment. The meeting didn't last much longer. There were only minor details left to discuss. Broderick had been at Hogwarts most of the day reviewing the memories in the pensive. Albus hadn't yet decided how to deal with the Muggles being aware of Wizardkin's activities, which he had carefully edited from the memory he had just shared. He would do the same for the one he planned to show to the minister. That kettle of fish needed to simmer a bit longer before he made any decisions. Their failed attempt at making perfume had gotten the Cutie Mark Crusaders a lecture from Fluttershy on not traumatizing skunks. with an order to let them leave if they wanted. They also had to apologize to them and to promise not to ever do it again. The attempt ensured that every pony stayed at least 5 yards away from them at all times for the rest of Thursday. Not to mention that every pony with a wand or horn very quickly learned the air-freshening spell out of the Hogwarts spellbooks. The skunks looked envious of those with wands and horns. Who knew that they didn't like that concentrated a smell of their defense mechanism? It kinda made sense it was for defense, not practically taking a bath Indiana. Usually, they got to run away after spraying their annoyance. This time they had been forced to stay around. And, boy, was it strong. At least one pony went to the portal buildings and acquired a wand just to learn that spell. Plus, the cutie mark crusaders learned that the normally shy and quiet Fluttershy could yell very loudly, even from across a garden. And to think, normally you had to stand with an ear almost in her mouth to hear what she was saying. It was quite impressive. It still made them feel bad. The most depressing part was not getting a cutie mark for their troubles. On the bright side, there was only a little bit of sap involved in that adventure. Then came trying to be detectives. They wanted to find out what the twins were doing wandering so randomly around the castle. The twins were surprisingly effective at evading them. They would be on one floor, then suddenly they would be on another. Sometimes on the opposite side of the castle. Scootaloo insisted they must be teleporting, but Harry wasn't as sure. Detective work was boring. Sure, at first it was fun hiding and spying. But after a short while where nothing was happening except watching as the twins stood and talked, and then they had to hunt for the missing twins who had just been right there, it wasn't nearly as intriguing. They spent Friday afternoon and evening, and Saturday morning and afternoon trailing after them before the Crusaders called it quits. Myrtle, for some reason, was very amused by their attempts at being crafty and sly. No cutie marks, there either. But then again, they hadn't solved the case, so maybe that was still a viable crusade, just not a very exciting one. Maybe they could try for that one at Hogwarts. But were there any mysteries there to be solved? After dinner, they started out for the portal zone. Harry could hear what suspiciously sounded like cheers coming from Ponyville when they reached Sweet Apple Acres. But it was probably just the wind in the trees. Yeah. That had to be it. Only were those fireworks he heard? Nah. Couldn't be. Must be his imagination. The security going back through the portal was very strict indeed. Everything was thoroughly checked 3 times. They even used a spell to see if the ponies headed for the portal were concealing something inside their bodies. Their saddlebags were very thoroughly searched. They spent the night in Little Whinging. Bright Star looked around the guard station in Manhattan. The very large, and new, flue was centrally placed in the transport room. There was more than enough space to accommodate 100 or so ponies. In fact, it reminded her more of an exercise auditorium, implying that they could quickly organize for large numbers of incoming or outgoing troops. The guard at the desk nodded to her after she recovered her balance. She noticed there were 2 teams of Pegasi with the new machine guns located behind small enclosures in opposite corners of the ceiling. A unicorn stood with each. Any pony trying to attack through the flue would have a real battle on her hooves. The books from the humans' world on military tactics, with modern weaponry, had been taken to heart by the princesses, it seemed. The trip hadn't been as smooth as the trip to Canterlot had been. Maybe she should have waited and not had lunch before traveling. But she had needed a bite and a rest after spending the morning digging up a couple more gems. She had found only 3 more after digging and wandering for 2 hours. Which gave her a total of 13. But, still, she was all the way to Manhattan, now. Just 10 minutes ago she had been in Ponyville. That beat the Tartarus out of walking, taking the train, taking an airship, or even just teleporting. Plus, this way she didn't arrive exhausted from a trip. The speed was breathtaking to contemplate. Even if Lunch wanted to come back for a second try. Yet, here she was. Fortunately, A city map was located on the front wall and she quickly located where the 3 hospitals were that served the city. A few minutes later, and she was past the station gate and in the city. It seemed silly that it took far longer to walk 10 blocks than it did to cross the country. But, she decided, that was the wave of the future. She had better get used to it because it was the way wizards traveled. Her explorations took a few hours. She had to be careful to raise no suspicions with her questions. Color-changing her appearance and cutie mark each time would help throw off any pony trying to track her after she left. It wouldn't look right for Bright Star to not know where her relative was spending her last days. The first hospital was a bust. None of the ponies on the terminal care floor would last for more than a week, maybe 2. Or they already had family in attendance. The same was true for the second. The third, however, had the perfect patient. An old unicorn mare, no close family, and expected to linger for weeks. She left the hospital, changed back to her Bright Star persona, and located a hotel down the street. After checking in, she headed back to the hospital. She asked a nurse for Ember Glow's room number, found it, and then went in. She pulled over a chair, made herself comfortable, and laid a hoof on the sleeping old mare's foreleg. She looked around the room, studying where everything was. Then she pulled a book from her saddlebags and started reading. If she acted like she belonged, no pony would object. "Who are you?" came the hoarse, weak voice sometime later. Bright Star looked up from her book and met surprisingly clear eyes watching her. "No one should be alone at a time like this, Auntie M," she said quietly. The mare closed her eyes. "Oh," she said. And went back to sleep until a nurse came in with dinner. "She's my Auntie M," explained Bright Star to the puzzled Pegasus. The old mare had stared at her a moment, then smiled at the nurse. "That I am," she whispered. "I'll see you tomorrow morning," Bright Star said to the sleeping mare before she left later that evening. She would eat a late dinner, and tomorrow an early breakfast. Then take a long lunch to run a few errands. Such as finding a lawyer to mail the letters at regular intervals. She would use another alias for that chore. But she still wanted more than just the hospital ponies to see her as Bright Star. Plus, she needed someone to take her place when she left next week. Hopefully, the mare would hang on for at least 2 weeks. If she was really lucky, maybe 4. In the meantime, the mare would have a comforting presence during her last days. Bright Star, in the meantime, would get some important research reading done on her planned new home. Harry was very disappointed that his mum refused his suggestion to take the Fleur to Hogsmeade at dusk, and then walk to Hogwarts. He would much rather have spent the day with her. Bon Bon and Lyra were probably already there, with a trunk. But, no, they had to take the train. The train trip was as interesting as a train trip. That is, the only interesting part was when the trolley lady came by with the sweets at least for them. Hermione, on the other hand, had been completely gobsmacked at her presence from Equestria. She was just as stunned at their adventures there. Harry was sure she thought they were joking when they mentioned the harmony songs. Even Myrtle chiming in didn't completely convince her. Then they lost her to her new book. So, it was on to Gob's tones. However, by the time the trolley lady arrived, they were ready for something else. Myrtle disappeared to be with her friends, and to regale them with her adventures and observations. Percy was patrolling the train, and being rather officious about it, naturally. The twins had been coming and going the entire trip, so far. Harry didn't understand why they kept coming back instead of staying with their friends. Unless it was to make sure they didn't miss anything exciting. The Frnds were developing something of a reputation. Or maybe it was just to mess with Ron and Ginny. They were having fun taking the PSS of Ron about Scabbers. Professor McGonagall had assured him that the house elves would easily take care of his pet rat while he was in Equestria. Unless he had finally died of old age. The headmaster took a slow, amiable look around the meeting room. It was just after lunch on Sunday and the elves had cleared the table. "First, let me say to those I haven't had a chance to yet, I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas hauls. It was quite peaceful here at Hogwarts, with nothing exciting to report at all. Quite a change from the previous 4 months. He smiled expansively, eyes twinkling. Several cast questioning looks at the pensieve on the table near his seat. They discussed the soon-to-arrive students for about an hour, and a few last-minute items were discussed to death. Pomona spoke last. You remember I had the Hufflepuffs and Gryffindors carrying the walking plants for several weeks? They nodded, although some were clearly bored. Well, I finished collating the results. She shuffled some papers in front of her on the table. Naturally, as expected, the walking plants carried by students in the study had better foliage and more growth than those that were kept back at the greenhouse, about 5% more a response to the attention they received. She looked up at the room and smiled. However, the plants carried by Sweetie Belle, Scootaloo, and Harry Potter were significantly better than the others carried by the Hufflepuffs and the other Gryffindors. They increased by between 15 and 20%. Except for the 2 carried by Ronald Weasley and Apple Bloom. Ron Weasley's plant had almost 25% thicker foliage and growth, while Apple Bloom had just under 40%. She looked up, eyes shining. I recruited Percy Weasley to also carry a walking plant for several weeks. It showed almost a 30% increase in thicker foliage and growth. Perhaps because his magic is older and more mature. She shivered slightly. It seems that having an earth pony animagus form conveys an ability to dramatically increase a plant's growth. And that even just being from Equestria provides a boost, especially for earth ponies. She stared at them, her eyes settling on Severus. Do you understand the implications this has on farming? Does it also increase a magical plant's potency in potions? She grinned at Severus' raised eyebrow. I would like your permission, Albus, to recruit Apple Bloom, Percy, Ron, and Severus into some experiments with potion ingredients. She looked at him hopefully, and slid a folder down to him. Albus smiled at her enthusiasm. We shall see what the students think of that opportunity. If Severus has the time. She happily sat back. Severus was still staring at her folder, a contemplative expression on his face. Albus knew the wizard would make the time, if he had to. Albus straightened and sighed. If there is nothing else. He looked around the room. Several people were surreptitiously gathering their papers in anticipation. Severus stayed still, he knew there was more coming. There was a chorus of soft no's in response. He nodded and took a deep breath. I do have some news, before you all go. They paused and looked at him, several sitting back down. I was fortunate enough to be invited to a ball in Equestria the Saturday before last. He looked at the pensieve on the table, then back up. I must confess, I was wrong about the Equestrians we have met, and where they come from. The situation is far more complicated than I ever suspected. He pursed his lips. Everyone in Equestria is a pony. Later, there was a knock on their cabin door. Apple Bloom, being the nearest, opened it. It was Draco and his boyfriends. He scanned the cabin, stopping at the twins. For a moment they all just looked at each other. Ron had just opened his mouth to say something when Draco bowed slightly. It was oddly cordial. He stared at them with narrowed eyes, silent, then took an envelope out of his pocket. I don't like you, he said, his glare sweeping across them, again, to stop at the Weasley twins. However, he said frostily, my father has instructed me to give you this. He held the letter out to the 2 tall redheads. Fred took it with raised eyebrows. My father expects your owl at your soonest convenience, but no later than Friday. He again glared at the people in the cabin. He started to close the door, but stopped. I know you turned me into a witch. He glared at the twins. I will get even. He slammed the door shut. They looked at each other, astonished. That was the politest he had ever been to them outside of the first week of school. Well, said George, nudging his brother. What does it say? Fred took out his wand and cast several spells at the envelope. He blinked, then shrugged. Well, no curses, at least. He broke the seal, unfolded the heavy paper inside, and read it. His brother peered over his shoulder. Both their jaws dropped. It was funny to watch. Not as funny as it would have been in Equestria. Their jaws weren't impossibly stretched but still funny. Fred audibly gulped. Hermione said eagerly, "Well, what is it?" She started to stand to peek at the letter. "Don't keep us in suspense." George cleared his throat. "He's ordered 100 of our gender-changing candies at a galleon each, payment on DLVRY, as a sample to test the market. With a contract that he won't try to discover how they work without our express permission." Fred had recovered by then. "And the possibility that if the candies work as he expects, he will offer to buy the formula, complete, for 10,000 galleons." They looked at each other, then said simultaneously, "We need to talk to Dad." They spent the rest of the trip huddled, whispering. The three fillies stopped and stared at the carriages. "What are those?" Scuttaloo half whispered. "I dunno," said Apple Bloom. "They sorta look like night ponies, but they're so much bigger," said Sweetie Belle. "And they look meaner, too," said Scuttaloo. "Like they're starvin', Dot." "What are you talking about?" Harry asked. The others in their group were staring at the three equestrians who were staring at the space in front of each carriage. "Those giant night ponies," said Sweetie Belle, pointing at nothing, as far as the others could tell. "Those," came Percy's fussy voice from behind them, "are Thestrals." They all turned to face him. "Thestrals?" Hermione asked. "Yes," he said, in the same tone. "You'll learn about them if you take care of magical creatures." He sighed. "You can only see them if you've seen someone die," he said sadly, and shook his head. "There's a herd of them in the Forbidden Forest. They always pull the carriages." He looked at the three fillies. "You've seen someone die?" he asked quietly. The three equestrians shuddered. "Yeah," Apple Bloom said quietly. The other two nodded. He glanced at the others. "They look like starving horses with bat wings." He gazed at the space in front of the carriage. "I've only seen textbook pictures of them. They look very frightening. But Professor Kettleburn, he teaches that subject, says they are like any other horse, just stay away from their teeth." He sighed. "Oh, and they eat meat." He shook his head. "Okay, you lot, get in the carriages before they're all full." The ride up to the castle was quiet. The others kept looking at the equestrians, but none of them wanted to be the one to ask whom they had seen die. Harry knew it must have been during the changeling invasion of Canterlot, at Princess Cadance and Shining Armor's wedding. The fillies avoided talking about that as much as possible. The outbreak of astonished disbelief was expected and Dumbledore waited it out. "When I went through the portal, I became a unicorn, which is, I assure you, not my animagus form." He reached over the table and tapped his wand on the pensieve. The memory of what he had looked like while being dressed at Rarity's, as well as the other two ponies played out, projected in the air over the table. You will note that the furnishings, and the dimensions of the room, are all arranged to fit a pony, not a person. The pony mannequins clearly illustrated his point. The magic displayed the memory background depending on where you were sitting, so nothing obscured anyone's vision. They watched in rapt attention, with an occasional surprised remark, as Rarity manipulated many objects simultaneously without a charm. The heavily edited memory, primarily so they wouldn't be here all day, skipped to Princess Twilight's castle, just as he came in sight of it, and continued onward to inside where he met the others. Their astonishment matched what his own had been. "I'm sure you recognize Harry and the Weasleys, as well as Miss Bell, Miss Bloom, and Miss Scuttaloo, having seen them as ponies before," he commented. "This one is Miss Warren." They gasped as Spike brought in a tray with a tea set on it. Then gasped again at his conversation with the ponies. A dragon so small, and intelligent, was unheard of in their experience. The scene skipped to just before they flew to Canterlot. He paused it and pointed out the ponies they hadn't met yet. It resumed as they entered the ballroom. Their gasp, as they saw the size of the room and the numerous ponies sitting, walking, and flying, was loud. Only Severus was quiet. But, then, he had seen all this in the pensive last week, and in much more detail. The memory skipped around, edited to remove the boring parts. He made sure to include his brief encounter with the impressive Griffinstone ambassador. Seeing and hearing a griffin, to them a dumb beast, carrying on an intelligent conversation left them mumbling in wonder. The memory skipped the part where the prophecy was mentioned, but paused at the instant discord changed in front of Albus. "This is the creature responsible for everything," he said quietly. "Poseidon," gasped McGonagall, echoed by several others. "I believe he pretended to sink Atlantis in an earthquake, using that as an excuse to hide the island from our sight. I believe he transformed the inhabitants into ponies so long ago that they believe they are ponies and not wizards and witches. I believe he has hidden them from the rest of the world until now. And I think he has designed the portal so that it operates the way it does on ponies and wizards." He stroked his beard for a few minutes as the staff reacted. "I believe that's why there are so many connections between our Greek histories and Equestria. Equestria is Atlantis from those histories." Albus allowed the edited memory to continue until just after discord revealed the origin of the Pegasi. "This creature is a true god, not just a powerful wizard, as far as we are concerned. He changes reality to whatever suits his fancy at the moment. I could feel his power, and it was much greater than mine. And you just saw him give 3 squibs animagi forms." They sat stunned at the revelations. Quirinus was paying close attention and seemed deep in thought. "The Equestrians, Atlanteans, we see are his friends. We must tread carefully here. Even the princesses Celestia and Luna are careful of what they say and do in his presence." He gazed at everyone. "The 3 Equestrians are students, do not treat them any other way. Their 2 Minders, Miss Bonbon and Miss Heartstrings, are to be treated with respect. We do not know if this god of chaos is paying attention to them or not. Do err on the side of caution." He waited until each professor and staff member had acknowledged his order. Finally, he said, "I have been informed that Harry Potter has been officially adopted by Princess Twilight into her family." In Equestria, Albus paused and looked around the table. In Equestria, he is now Prince Harry James Sparklepotter. There was a new uproar. He again waited it out. Severus sneered at the repetition of the news. Already convinced Potter was pampered and spoiled, he couldn't imagine how impossible the boy would be after that. However, here, he is still Harry James Potter. Nothing has changed. And I expect everyone to treat him that way. He smiled and said, "And that concludes our first meeting of the year. I believe we all have a last few errands to complete before the students arrive, so, good afternoon." He sat back and watched them leave. Ellie was delighted to be back in Hogwarts. While visiting with the abbots had been interesting, the opportunities to maintain her reserves were better at school. If she had to depend on the abbots, alone, she would run into problems sooner rather than later. It was a new term at Hogwarts. Some students were seeing their significant others, or those they hoped would become their significant others, for the first time since before the holidays. Ellie had found that a bit helpful. She had spent most of the trip on the train wandering up and down the corridor, pausing outside the cabins with the most generous outpourings of love. She had been comfortably fed by the time they arrived. She now had 6 jars filled, and after she offloaded today's excess, she would have almost 7. That should be more than enough to last her through the summer, without her having to be frugal. She couldn't splurge, of course, but more than enough to keep her comfortable. Whatever she managed to acquire between now and then was the phrase, extra icing on the cake, right? The sight of the strange skeletal horses pulling the carriages had thoroughly spooked her. Especially when several had turned to look at her. Giant night ponies? Here. Did they know she was a Ling? Only her faith in her new default form kept her from fleeing. She didn't look like a changeling, now did she? And she wasn't using any magic to maintain her form, was she? That, and none of the other Hufflepuffs seemed to see anything amiss. Which left her wondering what was going on as students talked about the horseless carriages. Couldn't they see the night ponies? However, the more she looked the less certain she became that they were night ponies. For one, they looked like they hadn't eaten, or had enough to eat, in weeks. For another, they didn't seem the least bit concerned at seeing her. They kept their silence. And, finally, their snouts looked more draconian than pony. Still, she kept a close eye on them, both at the train station and at the castle. In any case, tonight she intended to visit the room with the mirror one more time. Had anything changed? Waiting through the second term feast was nerve-wracking, but she managed to mask her impatience and presented a happy face to all her friends. Nothing had changed, she saw. She was still a mother queen with her children around her. Although some of the witches and wizards she saw to the sides looked suspiciously like her classmates in Hufflepuff. Then she thought she saw that one of those in the back had a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. She stared at the mirror, but it didn't show up again. Had she imagined it? Was she imagining it? Could this be a possible future? Or only her dreams made visible? Or was it trying to fool her? She couldn't become a mother queen, could she? Plus, she knew some of the lings she saw, her friends, classmates in the hive, were dead. Weren't they? Could she be wrong? If this was showing the future, then she wasn't alone. She could feel herself getting excited at the prospect. She wasn't alone. She carefully examined every ling she could see for wounds. She was about to leave when she heard the distinct sounds of people outside the room she was in. She darted to a dark corner and was about to become a wall when she had second thoughts. A green flash from an empty room at night would simply draw their attention. Instead, she crouched down and cast the Notice Me Not spell she had learned from the guard book she had nicked months ago. It hadn't been easy, at first, but steady practice had done the job. Then she cast a silencing charm on herself. It didn't make her invisible, though. As long as she did nothing to draw interest, they would see her, but not really notice her. Once she had the skill and power, it would be the next best thing to being invisible. "How did we end up here?" came from the corridor. It sounded like Hermione. "That portrait always used to take us to Ollery." "Magic," came the dry response from Harry. "Hey, look in there." That was definitely Ginny. And it sounded like she was right beside the open door. A moment later, all 7 of the pony posse walked into the room. "There," she said, pointing at the mirror. "I thought I saw something." "What is it?" said Ron. "It's a mirror," said Sweetie Belle, stepping in front of it. Then she gasped in shock. "What does Erised eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi mean?" asked Apple Bloom, as she stared first at the mirror's frame, Sweetie Belle's gobsmacked expression, and then at Hermione quizzically. "Forget that," said Sweetie Belle, grabbing and pulling Apple Bloom to her. "Do you see that?" She pointed at the mirror. Apple Bloom shrugged. "What?" "I can see just you and me." Sweetie Belle frowned, then pushed the other witch to stand directly in front of the mirror where she had been. "Here. Stand here," she ordered. Apple Bloom frowned at her, but looked back at the mirror. "Whoa," she said, her eyes popping wide open. The others crowded around them, hiding the mirror from Ellie's sight. They quickly started taking turns. An excited babble erupted as they all started talking at the same time, then died down as they realized they each saw something a bit different. While what the witches saw always included Harry, and usually the others, Harry seemed to include his parents and none of the others' reflections did. Include Harry's parents, that is. Their own parents were always there. What Ron saw was radically different. "I'm alone," he started, then frowned. "I'm different," he said, squinting. "I look older, I'm head boy," he said in shock. "I've got the house cup," he said excitedly, "and the Quidditch cup." His eyes widened even further, "I'm Quidditch captain, too." Ron tore his eyes away from this splendid sight to look breathlessly at the rest. Do you think this mirror shows the future? Harry snorted. How can it? My original parents here are dead, Harry said bitterly. Hermione looked again at the mirror's frame, studying it carefully. Wait, that legend isn't in a foreign language, it's backwards. It says, I show you not your face but your heart's longing. They looked at each other. Makes sense, Sweetie Belle said. She looked at her equestrian friends. We want our cutie marks. Harry wants family. She stepped close to him and hugged him. Which he now has. She glanced at the other wizard, still hugging Harry. Ron wants to stand out from his brothers. Hermione and Ginny both want family, friends, and success. Scootaloo sighed in disappointment. So, not the future, only a dream. No, Hermione said slowly. I think it's a wonderful gift to know what you really and truly want in your life. Not what you think you want at this moment. She stared at Harry. Like knowing that your parents approve. She stared at the four equestrians. And noticed that certain people in the reflection are clear, while the others are not. For several minutes they took turns standing in front of the mirror, studying the images for clues on a possible future. Or just admiring how their lives might turn out. The equestrians were especially interested in trying to see their cutie marks which were impossible to get a good look at, no matter how they tried. They tended to be out of focus or obscured by others in the mirror. Ellie tried to suppress her bitterness at the discovery of the mirror's true purpose. A lapse in her control might cause problems. She could possibly reveal herself. Harry just basked in the glow of seeing those he would never see in real life. We still need to get to the Ollery, Sweetie Belle finally said. It's getting close to curfew. Unless you want to forget sending an owl tonight. Nah, said Ron, Mom'll throw a wobbly if we don't at least tell her we're back from Equestria and safe at Hogwarts. Reluctantly, they left the room. We'll have to come back tomorrow, Ellie heard Ginny say from the hall. She waited a few more minutes until their footsteps faded away, then headed for the Hufflepuff rooms. So, the mirror didn't show the future, but what her heart truly wanted to be true. She sighed dispiritedly. She would have to come back tomorrow, although she wanted to stay and explore this new revelation. However, staying all night or missing curfew would cause problems for her. Hopefully, the posse would be too busy to come visit here. She knew what she wanted, maybe the mirror could help her determine some of the things she needed to do to make it happen. Because the equestrian's presence was now official, Castor's meeting with the Prime Minister and the secretaries of the Home Office and the Foreign Office could finally take place as a regularly scheduled event during the day. Something all three appreciated and their spouses. This Monday morning's meeting included the directors of both MI5 and MI6. Castor was a little frazzled. The Searles had returned from Equestria late the night before. He had barely had time to drop off the film and his notes with Director Walker this morning before being told of this meeting. Which gave him barely an hour to brief the man on what he had seen and heard and rough out a plan on what to say. He hadn't even had time to tell him of his wife's and his daughter's new hair and eye colors. A late-night trip to the chemist's had provided temporary solutions for the hair. For their eye colors, they were going to claim to be trying out new contacts. After they had settled and the opening formalities were finished, the Right Honorable Kenneth Baker started right in. As soon as we received your note about your equestrian title, I had the experts look into it. He shuffled the papers on the table in front of him. The title itself is not an issue. First, it is honorary only, no real powers are invested in it. Second, the title would only be at issue if you or your wife wished it to be used in an official capacity here in England, such as on business stationery or official announcements at events and to the press. You can use it informally among your friends and colleagues, if you like, though. He gazed steadily at Castor. Otherwise, we would have to ask Parliament to grant you an exception to the law. Or the Queen could grant it. I'd rather not ask. Castor shook his head. I have no longing for it to be official. I think it was granted more for political reasons in Equestria than anything else. The princesses seemed rather clear on that point. The Home Secretary nodded. There are no properties granted, he continued, so that isn't an issue, either. The 10,000-bit allowance, however, is another matter. He glanced at the Foreign Secretary, Sir Douglas Hurd, then Sir Walker, the director of MI5. Do we have an exchange rate on that? Sir Walker sighed heavily and took a coin out of his pocket. He casually tossed it on the tabletop. It hit with the ring of heavy solid metal. 1 bit. 1 bit will buy you an apple at Sweet Apple Acres, he said dryly. 1.1 troy ounces of solid 100% gold, 2,200 pounds and 10 shillings, as of this morning. They all stared at the coin. Which translates to roughly 2,205,000 pounds per annum in English pounds. Roughly. He sighed. Assuming the price of gold doesn't go up. After a moment, the Home Secretary, Baron Baker, said, "We cannot allow that to stand." He looked regretfully at Castor. Even if the Queen were willing to grant an exception, Parliament would have a fit. They would see it as a clear bribe. He shook his head. 2 million pounds a year, he said in a wondering voice. Sir Walker took a deep breath. However, he looked at the rest. That means the PND has correspondingly little purchasing power in Equestria. Making any purchases of books or construction of an embassy extremely expensive. Even a modest £1 million for an embassy would translate into over £200 million. I don't think we could get such a budget passed for a single building, no matter where it was. As such, we can't merely dismiss the per annum out of hand. The Prime Minister frowned heavily. Turning it down might offend the princesses. One of my assistants, Sir Walker said, suggested that we instruct Castor to officially accept the per annum with the proviso that it is to Her Majesty's government, not to him personally. He was employed by the government and merely acting in his official capacity, at first. Then he was under orders to assist the Equestrians. Castor spoke up. Princess Celestia assumed we would do something like that and has prepared a list of books we might want to purchase with the per annum. He nodded at Sir Walker, who had pulled papers from his folder and was sliding them across the table to each of the others. Her sister said to me, in her hearing, that the reason for the per annum was to get more bits in circulation in their kingdom. So, she expects us to spend the bits there, not here. He smiled a bit nervously. It can't be much of a bribe if I can't spend it here, right? And we can assign a clerk to vet all expenditures and issue monthly reports to the finance department on the disbursements, added the Home Secretary. Which would keep everything above board. No different than the reparation payments the Germans made to the United Kingdom after World War II, said Sir Hurd, nodding. A payment from one government to another. Baron Baker nodded emphatically. Sir Hurd raked the room with a steady gaze. We absolutely do not want to offend these equestrians. The opportunities they make available to us are worth trillions of pounds in both the civilian and military markets. This new technology is going to transform the world. We absolutely do not want anyone else to take England's place at the forefront. Turning down this per annum might just do that. If we have to bend a few rules, or arms, to do it, I say we keep the equestrians happy and accept this with as good grace as we can manage. The Prime Minister nodded, his frown disappearing and a small smile reappearing. The Conservative Party will control Parliament for a good many years, I would say, he said quietly, if we can pull this off. Which they all understood meant he would be Prime Minister for a very long time. So, let's do that. Castor's financial clerk will report directly and only to the Director of Finance. His instructions should be to make sure that there is never the appearance of bribery in his dealings with the per annum. Either incoming or outgoing, Major said. The Foreign Office will determine any and all purchases, with the advice of the Home Office. Any purchases Castor personally makes for his position in Equestria will be taken from the proper departmental budget in the government. He looked around the room. Otherwise, it is his personal business and the expenditures are his responsibility. I will explain things to the Queen and request that she use her royal prerogative. With both her support and mine, the request for an exception regarding the per annum, with the given stipulations, should easily sail through Parliament. He sat back, quite pleased at how what could have been a disaster had been turned into an advantage. They spent a moment exchanging relieved smiles that this wouldn't sink them. Castor took a deep breath. He looked at Sir Walker and grimaced. He leaned forward and placed his arms on the table. "There are several things I wanted to say that I couldn't put in the messages I sent," he said quietly. The others immediately stopped perusing their papers and looked at him. "First, I cannot emphasize enough how powerful the two princesses are. And I don't mean politically, although they are that, too." He took a steadying breath. "I saw Princess Celestia move the sun. Actually, move the Sunday. And her sister moved their moon and rearranged the stars in the night sky." He paused and took a breath. "Their titles as Princess of the Sun and Princess of the Night are not metaphors, as we thought." He shook his head at their stunned expressions. "Wherever this Equestria is, it isn't in our universe. Or if it is, it's in a pocket with far different rules than here." Castor looked slowly around the meeting room table, catching everyone's eyes in turn. He stopped and held the Prime Minister's gaze. "I know that is hard to believe, but I checked my watch every single time and noted down the times." He took several papers from his pocket. They were from the secure copy machine at MI5 distributed them. "The times listed here are when the sisters actually moved the sun and moon. Beside each set is the time differential from morning to night and back." He looked at each person around the table. "You will note, when you look at those papers, that the times do not follow a set pattern, except for the sun to have less time during the day than the moon has the night. Sometimes the sun had 11 hours and about 15 minutes while the moon had 13 hours. Other times, the sun has 11 hours and about 5 minutes while the moon has 12 hours and 55 minutes. I would suspect that to be a seasonal variation, except the times are not sequential. One day has 11 hours and 5 minutes, the next at 10 hours and 55 minutes, then the third at 11 hours and 3 minutes. Which indicates that the two sisters are actually moving the sun and moon." He sighed. "Princess Celestia said that since reading about how our seasons worked, she has started to leave the sun at one brightness and just vary how long it stayed in the sky by several hours for entire seasons instead of only half an hour. As an experiment." Princess Luna seemed quite taken with the idea. He leaned back in his chair. "I realize you're not going to believe me until we have far more observations. I suggest we send at least a dozen of our best astronomers through with proper equipment. And request that Princesses Celestia and Luna allow them to watch the two rays and lower the sun and moon. I'll have more details, and photos, in my report." He gave them a few moments to mull that over. "Second, I think I have a temporary solution to leveling the exchange rate, perhaps even tilted in our favor." They looked up in interest at that. "Completely by accident I discovered that aluminium is a rare metal there, and quite expensive. Looking up the metal futures in the Financial Times gave me some figures. A metric ton of aluminium is approximately 7,716 pounds. In Equestria, that same ton of aluminium is roughly 6.5 million bits according to a pony named Fancy Pants, a friend of Ambassador Blueblood. 6.5 million bits is about 1.3 billion pounds. Castor grimaced. He gave me 27 bits to buy a kilogram of aluminium, knowing that those gold coins were worth almost 6,000 pounds and the aluminium would cost less than 4 pounds. He expects to make about 16,900 bits profit. He said that the bits he gave us was about the same percentage markup profit. He expects the price to fall dramatically as aluminium becomes readily available. But in the meantime, the government could use aluminium as a way to relieve the pressure on the fact that the Equestrians are still on the gold standard. We will need to think of a way to control the flow of aluminium through the portal, or will risk the possibility of severe disruptions to the world gold market. Even if it is only temporary. Perhaps we can make a trade ratio of aluminium for gold on par, that way neither economy is disrupted. I'll write a formal report on what happened later today when I get back to my office. He sighed and took a moment to gather his thoughts. Sir Walker waved his hand, indicating to the others that they should wait for Castor to continue. Third. Princess Luna is also known as the Princess of Dreams. Again, that is a literal title, not figurative. She made a point of asking me if she could visit my family's dreams, as the ones she had so far observed had been rather disturbing to her. She said human dreams are very unlike pony dreams. They were staring at him, wide-eyed. Princess Luna can, literally, invade your dreams, and learn any secrets you may have. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 38. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.